Virgin Mountain Man bought pregnant woman from her mother, then became a father overnight. The snow is falling hard in a lawless frontier town. A crowd jeers as a desperate mother auctions off her own daughter, heavy with child. No one steps forward until a shy, God-fearing mountain man lays down coin. They laugh, calling him the virgin fool who bought trouble. But when he carries her through the storm, something shifts. He's never touched a woman yet. Within weeks, he'll be holding her newborn in his arms. Overnight, a recluse becomes a father. Just as hope flickers, riders thunder in with a contract. The unborn child was already promised to a ruthless rancher. Now law and greed clash against mercy and love. Can a lonely man with no past as a husband stand against the powerful protect mother and child and claim a family of his own? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The Trading Post's wooden floorboards creaked beneath Kenneth Braddock's boots as he stepped inside, shaking snow from his worn coat. The warmth hit his face after hours in the bitter Colorado wind. Familiar scents of tobacco, leather, and wood smoke filled the air. He clutched his bundle of fox and beaver pelts closer, ducking his head as conversations hushed at his entrance. He'd hoped to slip in quietly, trade his furs, and leave before drawing attention. But the crowd gathered near the pot-bellied stove made that impossible. Their jeering voices carried across the room. $2 and a sack of flour. A woman's shrill voice cut through the murmurs. That's all I'm asking for her. Kenneth glanced over, then wished he hadn't. A girl no more than 20 stood beside an older woman, her head bowed, shoulders curved inward like a wounded bird. A thin calico dress couldn't hide the swell of her belly. Ain't worth 2 cents, let alone $2. Someone called out. Cruel laughter followed. The older woman, the girl's mother. Kenneth realized with a sick feeling, grabbed her daughter's arm. She's young and strong. Can cook, clean, so fine as any lady. Her eyes darted desperately around the room. Someone, take her off my hands. Kenneth's chest tightened. He knew that desperation. He'd seen it in his own mother's eyes before she died, leaving him alone at 12. The girl's face showed a deeper pain, betrayal by her own blood. More taunts flew. Damaged goods. Who'd want another man's get? The girl, Kenneth couldn't think of her as merchandise, trembled but didn't cry. Something in her quiet dignity struck him. Before he could think better of it, he stepped forward. I'll take her. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. The crowd fell silent. Then someone snickered. Well, if it ain't the Virgin Mountain Man. Finally found himself a woman. He crawled up Kenneth's neck. He forced himself to walk closer, focusing on the girl's face. Up close, he saw features both delicate and strong. High cheekbones, firm chin, eyes the color of summer sky. Fear flickered in those eyes, but something else too. Hope, maybe. He pulled $2 silver from his pocket, added them to a paper of flour from his pack. His hand shook as he held them out to the mother. She snatched them quickly. She's yours, then. Without a backward glance, she pushed through the crowd and out into the snowy night. The girl swayed slightly. Kenneth saw tears threatening, but still not falling. Slowly, carefully, he shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders. I'm Kenneth Braddock, he said softly. I've got a cabin. It's warm. Safe. He paused. I won't hurt you. Ava, she whispered. Ava Mae Callahan. Someone called out. Better watch out, girl. Mountain men eat their young. Kenneth felt Ava stiffen. He turned toward the crowd, drawing himself up to his full height. Though he hated confrontation, he wouldn't let them frighten her more. That's enough, he said, voice stronger now. Surprisingly, the laughter died down. Maybe something in his stance warned them off. Or maybe they'd just grown bored with their sport. "My sled's outside," he told Ava. "Can you walk that far?" She nodded, clutching his coat closer. As they moved toward the door, Kenneth heard mutters behind them. Virgin Mountain Man bought himself a pregnant girl. Won't be so pure come spring. He guided Ava out into the wind-whipped night, shielding her from both the cold and the words that followed them. His sled waited where he'd left it, the horses stamping restlessly in the deepening snow. He helped her up onto the seat, tucking warm buffalo robes around her dot as Kenneth took the reins. He sensed Ava studying him in the gathering dark. "Why?" she asked finally, voice barely audible above the wind. He considered the question carefully. "Because it wasn't right, what they were doing. What was happening to you?" He paused. "Because everyone deserves better than that." Ava was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice held a new steadiness. "Thank you." Kenneth clicked to the horses, and they started forward through the deepening snow. He felt Ava gradually relax beside him, perhaps realizing his words were true. He meant her no harm. As the trading post lights faded behind them, he knew both their lives had changed forever in ways neither could yet imagine. The winter wind bit at his exposed face and hands, but Kenneth barely noticed. He was too aware of the woman beside him, wrapped in his coat, carrying another man's child, trusting him enough to follow him into the unknown. He prayed silently for strength to be worthy of that trust. The horses' hooves crunched through fresh snow, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The sleigh glided between towering pines, their branches heavy with white. Ava huddled deeper into Kenneth's coat, stealing glances at the quiet man beside her. His hands, rough and scarred from trapping, held the reins with gentle sureness. When he spoke, which wasn't often, his words came out hesitant and stumbling. But his eyes, they held a kindness she'd rarely known. They reminded her of clear mountain streams. Honest and deep. Kenneth kept his gaze forward, though he seemed aware of her study. A flush colored his cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. After what felt like hours, the trees opened to reveal a small cabin nestled against a hillside. Smoke curled from its stone chimney into the star-filled sky. "It ain't much," Kenneth said softly, helping her down from the sleigh. "But it's warm inside." Ava's legs trembled from cold and fatigue as she followed him to the door. Kenneth struck a match, lighting a lamp that cast a warm glow over the cabin's single room. A narrow bed stood in one corner, its quilt neat and patched. A pot-bellied stove occupied the center, and rough-hewn shelves lined the walls. Kenneth moved quickly to the stove, adding wood and stoking the banked coals until flames licked upward. "The bed's yours," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I'll sleep on the floor." But Ava started to protest. "Please." His voice was firm despite its gentleness. "You need proper rest in your condition." Heat flooded her cheeks at the reminder of her pregnancy. She watched as Kenneth busied himself at the stove, pulling out a pot and various ingredients. His movements were awkward, as if her presence made him nervous. "I can help," she offered, but he shook his head. "You rest. I've got some venison stew I can heat up." Ava sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The events of the day crashed over her. Her mother's final betrayal, the jeering crowd, this strange man's unexpected mercy. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "My mother," she began, then stopped. Kenneth paused in his cooking, listening. "She's done this before, selling things that weren't hers to sell, including me more than once." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "But never like today." Kenneth's hand stilled on the spoon he was using to stir the stew. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "No mother should treat her child so. Why did you help me?" Ava asked. The question that had burned since the trading post. Kenneth was silent, so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, His voice shook slightly, because I know what it's like to be alone. He swallowed hard, to be mocked. He ladled stew into 2 tin bowls, handed one to her. He started, then stopped, face reddening. What they said at the trading post about me being a virgin, it's true. Never even kissed a woman. He stared into his bowl. Reckon that makes me a fool in their eyes. Ava felt something shift in her chest. His confession, offered so honestly, made her feel both more vulnerable and strangely safer. This man, with his stammering words and gentle hands, was as innocent as a child in some ways. They ate in comfortable silence, the stew warming her from inside. When the bowls were empty, Kenneth retrieved a worn Bible from a shelf. I usually read some before sleep, he said hesitantly. Would you mind? Mind? Ava shook her head, settling back against the pillow. Kenneth sat in his single chair, the lamp casting shadows across his face as he opened the Bible. His reading was halting, finger tracing each line, but the words carried their own beauty. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Ava's eyes grew heavy as his voice continued, rough but reverent. The last thing she remembered was the comfort of the bed, the warmth of the fire, and Kenneth's. Careful reading floating in the lamplit darkness. Kenneth watched as Ava's breathing deepened into sleep. Setting aside the Bible, he spread his bedroll on the floor, careful to keep his movements quiet. Before blowing out the lamp, he knelt beside his makeshift bed. Lord, he whispered, eyes closed tight, give me strength to be worthy of this trust. Help me protect her and her child. He paused, adding more softly, and help me be the man she needs me to be. The lamp's flame flickered out, leaving only the red glow of the stove's coals. In the darkness, Kenneth listened to Ava's steady breathing, wondering at how much his solitary life had changed in a single evening. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Kenneth rose early, stoking the fire back to life before Ava stirred. The cabin's warmth had kept the bitter cold at bay through the night. Ava woke to the smell of coffee brewing. She found Kenneth by the stove, his tall frame hunched over us. He worked with careful movements to avoid disturbing her rest. Thought I might show you around, he said quietly, offering her a steaming cup, if you're feeling up to it. Ava nodded, wrapping her fingers around the warm tin cup. Despite Kenneth's coat and her own layers, the morning air bit fierce when they stepped outside. Her breath clouded before her face as Kenneth led her toward a small barn. Got 2 horses, he explained, pushing open the wooden door. Inside, the animals nickered softly, and a milk cow. Helps during the lean times. His voice carried pride as he showed her the neat rows of tools hanging on the walls, each in its proper place. Beyond the barn, split logs stood stacked in even rows against the cabin side. Should last through winter, Kenneth said, patting. The woodpile. Got more to split, though. Always need more. Ava hugged herself against the cold as they walked. Kenneth noticed her shivering and frowned with concern. Maybe we ought to head back. No, she insisted. I want to see it all. Her determination brought a shy smile to his face. He pointed toward a narrow trail leading into the trees. That's my trapline. Runs about 3 miles through the valley. His eyes scanned the forest. Ain't caught much lately. Game's been scarce. Their next task was hauling water from the creek that ran behind the cabin. Ava insisted on helping despite Kenneth's protests. Her hands ached from the cold as they carried the heavy buckets, but she set her jaw and matched his steady pace. By midday, they sat at Kenneth's small table, sharing a simple meal of dried meat and beans. Ava watched him fumble with his fork, still nervous in her presence. Kenneth, she said softly, making him look up. I should tell you, the baby. She placed a hand on her swollen belly. "It won't be long now. A few weeks at most." The fork clattered from Kenneth's fingers. His face went pale as the snow outside as the reality of imminent fatherhood struck. "Him? Weeks?" he whispered, voice hoarse. I didn't realize. Are you angry?" Ava asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Kenneth shook his head quickly. No. Just," he swallowed hard. "Never been around babies much. Don't know the first thing about being a father." His honest admission hung in the air between them. The afternoon found them outside again, Kenneth teaching Ava how to split kindling. His large hands engulfed hers as he showed her how to hold the hatchet. "Like this," he demonstrated, then promptly sent a piece of wood flying sideways instead of splitting it. Ava's laugh, bright and unexpected, startled them both. Kenneth's face reddened, but soon he was chuckling too. "Maybe I ain't the best teacher," he admitted, retrieving the errant piece of wood. "Or maybe I'm not the best student," Ava replied, her eyes twinkling with amusement for the first time since he'd met her dot as evening approached. Kenneth baked cornbread in the cast-iron skillet, the cabin filled with its warm, homey smell. They sat before the fire to eat, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Ava broke the comfortable silence. "I was scared," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you bought me, I thought..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Kenneth set his plate aside, his face serious in the firelight. "I bought you," he said softly, "not as property, but so no man would harm you." His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. "You're free to go if you ever want to. But I hope," he looked down at his hands, "I hope you might find peace here." Ava studied his face in the flickering light, seeing him differently now. This gentle giant of a man who split wood poorly and read scripture carefully, who offered protection without demands. As night settled over the mountain, she felt something shift in her heart. Not love, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of trust. 3 days slipped by like water over stones, each one settling into a gentle rhythm. At the mountain cabin, the morning sun found Ava seated by the window, Kenneth's worn shirt spread across her lap. Her nimble fingers worked needle and thread through the fabric, closing holes and reinforcing seams that had grown weak with wear. Kenneth spent his days between the woods and the woodpile, his axe ringing out steady beats that echoed through the trees. He returned most evenings with rabbits or grouse, their supper secured by his careful aim. Though they spoke little, comfortable silence filled the spaces between them. On the 4th morning, Kenneth hitched the horses to the sled. "Need supplies," he said simply, helping Ava up onto the wooden seat. The journey to town took nearly 2 hours, the runners cutting smooth tracks through fresh snow dot as they approached the cluster of buildings that made up the trading post. Ava noticed the sideways glances and poorly hidden smirks. Whispers followed. Then down the street like shadows. "There goes the Virgin Mountain Man," one voice carried clearly across the street. "Thinks he's playing at being a husband." Another added, "Bought himself a ready-made family, he did." Heat crept up Ava's neck, shame burning in her chest. She ducked her head, one hand instinctively covering her swollen belly. Then she felt Kenneth's large hand settle on her shoulder, steady and warm through her shawl. When she glanced up, his jaw was set firm, but his eyes held only gentleness when they met hers. Inside the mercantile, Kenneth began gathering their supplies: salt, flour, coffee, and other necessities. Ava wandered the aisles until she found herself before a display of fabrics. Her fingers traced over soft muslin and sturdy cotton, mind already planning the tiny garments her baby would need. "We should get some," she said when Kenneth approached. "For the baby's things." Kenneth's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "Whatever you need," he said quietly, pulling coins from his pocket without hesitation. The sled ride home felt lighter. Somehow, despite their loaded supplies. As the horses plodded steadily through the snow, Ava gathered her courage. "Why did you choose me?" she asked, her voice barely carrying over the runner's swish. "That night at the trading post, you could have walked away like everyone else." Kenneth was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, his deep voice rumbled soft beside her. "Been alone a long time," he admitted. "Prayed about it often. Asked the Lord to show me His will." He adjusted the reins in his large hands. "When I saw you there, something just felt right. Like an answer to those prayers." Ava absorbed his words, watching his profile against the darkening sky. The simple honesty of his answer wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. Dusk was settling over the cabin when they arrived home, painting long shadows across the snow. Kenneth had just finished unloading their supplies when the sound of hoofbeats cut through the evening quiet. A rider approached at a steady pace, his horse's breath streaming in the cold air. "Mr. Braddock?" the rider called, pulling up near the cabin. "Got a message needs delivering." Kenneth stepped forward. Positioning himself slightly in front of Ava, the messenger produced a folded paper from his coat. "From Mr. James Carleton," the rider explained, handing it over, "regarding the matter of Miss Callahan and her child." Ava's breath caught in her throat as Kenneth unfolded the message. She watched his face darken as he read. "Says here," Kenneth's voice was tight, "that your mother made a deal. Sold rights to the baby to Carleton, wealthy rancher from down south." His fingers crumpled the paper's edge. "Seems he paid off her debts in exchange." "No," Ava whispered, one hand protectively covering her belly. "She can't. She has no right." "There's more," Kenneth continued, his other hand gripping his axe handle until his knuckles showed white. "Carleton claims the child has claim to some land. Says he'll have the baby." Kenneth's jaw clenched. "Or the land that comes with it." The messenger shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Carleton expects an answer within the week," he added, then turned his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness. Ava's legs trembled so badly she had to sit on the porch step. Kenneth remained standing, his tall frame rigid with tension, the crumpled message in one hand and his axe handle in the other. The evening wind carried the distant cry of a coyote, but otherwise silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of this new threat to their fragile peace. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows, casting pale squares on the cabin's wooden floor. Kenneth stood at the rough-hewn table, methodically running a whetstone along the edge of his hunting knife. The steady scraping sound filled the quiet cabin. Ava watched him from her seat near the fire, her hands clutching the muslin fabric they'd bought yesterday. "What you mean to do?" she asked softly. Kenneth tested the blade's edge with his thumb before answering. "Won't let them take the child," he said, his voice firm despite its usual roughness. "Ain't right. Selling babies like cattle." He set the knife down and picked up his axe, beginning to sharpen its edge as well. "We'll keep watch. Be ready." Ava nodded, turning back to her sewing. Her fingers moved steadily through the fabric, creating tiny, even stitches. "Ben, I need to be ready too," she said. "Baby could come any time now." She held up the partially finished swaddling cloth. "We'll need these, and more besides." The morning passed in productive silence. Kenneth checking and sharpening his tools while Ava worked on the baby clothes. Around midday, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. Kenneth moved to the window, knife in hand. "It's Preacher Morrison," he said, relief evident in his voice. He opened the door as the older man dismounted his horse. The preacher stomped snow from his boots, his weathered face drawn in concerned lines. "Mr. Braddock," he said formally. "Word spreading about your situation. Thought I'd best see for myself what's what." Kenneth stepped back, awkward but determined. "Come in, sir," I'll make coffee." The preacher's sharp eyes took in everything. The neat cabin, Ava's sewing by the fire, Kenneth's careful movements as he put the coffee pot on to boil. No impropriety, just two people sharing space with careful respect. "Miss Callahan." The preacher nodded to Ava. "How are you faring up here?" "Well enough, sir," she answered, setting aside her sewing. "Mr. Braddock has been kind." Kenneth brought cups of steaming coffee, his hands shaking slightly as he offered one to the preacher. "Sir," he started, his voice cracking. He swallowed hard and tried again. "I know how it looks, but I couldn't leave her there, being sold like that. Wasn't right. And now?" The preacher asked, sipping his coffee. "What are your intentions?" "To protect her and the child." Kenneth's voice grew stronger. "Give them a proper home. Safety." The preacher watched as Kenneth unconsciously moved to add wood to Ava's fire, the simple gestures speaking volumes. He saw how Ava's tension eased when Kenneth was near, how their movements showed consideration for each other's space. "I've known you some years, Kenneth," the preacher said finally. "Always found you honest, if not social. Never known you to act without thought." He set his cup down. "This situation isn't ideal, but I'm beginning to see the Lord's hand in it." Relief flooded Kenneth's face. Ava's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "I'll keep watch," the preacher promised, standing to leave. "And pray for wisdom in handling Carlton's demands." He paused at the door. "You might consider making this arrangement more official when the time is right." After the preacher left, the cabin felt different, as if his visit had somehow made their situation more real, more legitimate. The afternoon light slanted golden through the windows as Ava picked up Kenneth's warm Bible. "Would you like me to read?" she offered, seeing him settle in his chair. At his nod, she opened to the Book of Ruth, her clear voice filling the cabin. With ancient words of loyalty and redemption, Kenneth listened, his rough hand still in his lap, face softened by the firelight and Ava's gentle reading. The story of Ruth's faithfulness and Boaz's protection seemed to echo their own situation, lending it dignity and purpose. As evening settled around them, Ava closed the Bible. Without speaking, they both knelt beside the fire. Kenneth's deep voice joined Ava's softer one as they prayed, for protection, for wisdom, for the child that would soon join them. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as their prayers mingled with the crackling fire. In that moment, they were no longer just two wounded souls thrown together by desperate circumstances. They were a family forming, strengthened by shared faith and growing trust. The days melted together as winter tightened its grip on the mountain. Wind howled through the pine trees, bending their tops like wheat stalks in a summer storm. Inside the cabin, Kenneth added another log to the dwindling fire, his movements careful in the dim light. "Storm's getting worse," he muttered, more to himself than to Ava. She sat in her chair by the hearth, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other holding a half-finished baby blanket. The windows rattled as another gust slammed against the cabin. Kenneth pulled his coat tight and headed outside to gather more firewood. Snow stung his face as he trudged through knee-deep drifts to the woodpile. The stack was getting low, too low for his comfort. He loaded his arms with split logs, the rough bark catching on his wool sleeves. Back inside, snow melting from his boots, Kenneth noticed Ava's face had gone pale. She gripped the arms of her chair, knuckles white. "Kenneth," she whispered, voice tight with fear. I think it's time." The logs clattered from his arms onto the floor. "Now?" His voice cracked. "But the storm." Ava nodded, gasping as another pain gripped her. Kenneth stood frozen, terror threatening to overwhelm him. Then, like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, words from his daily scripture reading came to him. "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid." "Right," he said, squaring his shoulders. "What do you need me to do?" "Water," Ava managed between breaths. "Lots of it, boiled clean. And blankets." Kenneth moved with purpose now. He filled their largest pot with snow, setting it to boil on the cookstove. He gathered every clean blanket they owned, laying them near the fire to warm. When Ava cried out, he was at her side in an instant, offering his hand. She squeezed it hard enough to make his bones creak. "Thank you," she panted, "for everything." Hours crawled by like wounded animals. The storm raged outside, making the cabin creak and shudder. Kenneth kept the fire stoked, boiled more water, and held Ava's hand through each wave of pain. She tried to guide him between contractions, her voice growing weaker as the night wore on. "Need to? Check if the baby's coming?" she gasped. Kenneth's face flamed red, but he followed her instructions with trembling hands. Near midnight, the wind reached a fever pitch. Ava's labor intensified, her cries mixing with the storm's fury. Kenneth felt helpless, able only to murmur prayers and squeeze her hand in return. "I see the head," he suddenly exclaimed, voice shaking. "What do I do?" "Support it," Ava ground out between clenched teeth. Gentle. Kenneth's huge hands, so skilled at trapping and woodcraft, now cradled new life with infinite tenderness. "Keep pushing," he encouraged, his voice stronger than he felt. "You're doing it, Ava. You're so strong." With a final tremendous effort, Ava bore down. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the storm's howl, the lusty cry of a newborn baby boy. Kenneth's hands trembled as he held the squalling infant, tears streaming down his face unchecked. "A son," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Ava, you have a son." Following her tired instructions, Kenneth cleaned the baby with warm water and wrapped him in soft blankets. When he placed the bundle in Ava's arms, the look of wonder on her tear-streaked face made his heart swell near to bursting. "He's perfect," Ava breathed, touching the baby's tiny fingers. Kenneth knelt beside them, one large hand spanning the baby's back. "I promise," he said solemnly, "I'll protect you both. No one will ever harm either of you while I draw breath." The baby's cries softened to quiet whimpers as he nestled against his mother's warmth. Outside, as if heaven itself approved, the storm began to ease. The wind's howl diminished to a whisper, and the cabin's walls no longer shook. Kenneth tended the fire and cleaned up while Ava nursed the baby for the first time. As dawn approached, pale light crept through the frost-covered windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that glittered in the early morning. Some. Standing at the window, Kenneth watched the sunrise paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Behind him, Ava hummed softly to their son, for that's how he already thought of the baby, as theirs. In one storm-tossed night, he had become a father, not by blood, but by choice. The responsibility settled on his shoulders like a mantle, heavy but welcome. Morning light spilled through the frost-edged windows, revealing the storm's fierce legacy. Kenneth stood at the doorway, stunned by the transformation outside. Snowdrifts rose like white mountains against the cabin walls, and the fence post that marked his property line had vanished beneath the pristine blanket of snow. The world looked scrubbed clean, peaceful in a way that made his heart swell with gratitude. Inside, Ava dozed in the bed, her face peaceful despite her exhaustion. The baby boy slept beside her in a nest of blankets, his tiny fists curled against his chest. Kenneth watched them for a moment, still amazed by how his lonely cabin had transformed overnight into a home filled with such precious life. Moving quietly, Kenneth gathered his woodworking tools and several pine boards he'd been saving for special projects. The wood was smooth and fragrant, dried properly over many months. He'd never built a cradle before, but his hands knew how to coax beauty from raw lumber. The familiar rhythm of saw and plane brought comfort as he worked, Without realizing it, he began to sing softly, an old hymn his mother had sung when he was small. His voice was rough and uncertain, lacking proper tune, but the baby seemed to settle deeper into sleep at the sound. Kenneth smiled, remembering how folks used to tease him about his awkward ways. None of that seemed to matter anymore. "That's pretty," Ava whispered, startling him. She stood in her nightdress, wrapped in a quilt, watching him work with soft eyes. "Didn't mean to wake you," Kenneth mumbled, ducking his head. "Just trying to make something proper for the little one to sleep in." Before Ava could respond, a knock echoed through the cabin. Kenneth tensed, reaching for his rifle, but Ava placed a gentle hand on his arm. Through the window, they could see several of their neighbors standing in the snow, arms laden with bundles. Kenneth opened the door cautiously. Mrs. Peterson from the mercantile stepped forward first, her arms full of bread and preserves. Behind her, other familiar faces peered around, the same ones who'd once whispered and laughed about the Virgin Mountain Man. "We heard the baby came during the storm," Mrs. Peterson said, her eyes kind. "Thought you might need some help getting started." One by one, the neighbors filed in, bearing gifts, soft blankets, dried herbs for tea, even a small barrel of flour. Their curious glances turned to genuine smiles as they watched. Kenneth carefully lifted his son, for that's how he thought of him now, and cradled him with enormous, gentle hands. "He's a natural," someone whispered, and Kenneth felt his ears burn red with pleasure rather than shame. The women clustered around Ava, offering advice and congratulations, while the men clapped Kenneth on the shoulder, suddenly treating him like one of their own. The cabin filled with warm chatter and the aroma of fresh bread. As afternoon settled into evening, the neighbors departed, leaving the new family to their peace. Kenneth returned to his woodworking, adding finishing touches to the cradle, while Ava hummed hymns from her chair by the fire. The baby slept contentedly in her arms, wrapped in one of the new blankets. Between smooth strokes of his carving knife, Kenneth shaped small wooden toys, a horse, a bear, simple things that would delight small hands in the months to come. Each cut was made with care and love, his large fingers surprisingly delicate in their work. The cabin felt different now. Where once there had been only silence and solitude, warmth and life filled every corner. The rough walls seemed to glow with lamplight, and even the old furniture looked softer, more welcoming. Simple things, a baby's blanket draped over a chair, tiny clothes hanging by the fire to dry, transformed the space into something sacred. As night drew its curtain across the snow-bright world, Kenneth placed the finished cradle beside their bed. He'd carved pine boughs along its sides, a touch of beauty for their son's dreams. Ava laid the sleeping baby in it, her fingers lingering on the smooth wood. Kenneth stood beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never knew a man could be this blessed." His words carried the weight of years of loneliness. Now lifted. Ava looked up at him, really looked at him, seeing past the rough exterior to the gentle soul beneath. Her smile held trust now, and something more, the beginning of deep affection. She reached for his hand, and he took it, their fingers intertwining as they watched their son sleep in his new cradle. The late winter days melted slowly into early spring thaw. Patches of muddy earth began to peek through the snow around the cabin, and the air carried hints of warming change. Kenneth rose before dawn each morning, driven by new purpose to repair the fences damaged by winter's harsh grip. His strong hands worked the wood with growing confidence, each post set firm and true. Inside the cabin, Ava moved with quiet grace, tending to their son with a mother's devotion. She'd named him Samuel after the prophet who heard God's call, and Kenneth had agreed with moisture in his eyes. The baby grew stronger each day, his cries and coos filling the once silent cabin with life. Together, they found unexpected joy in the rhythm of daily chores. Kenneth showed Ava how to milk their cow, his large hands guiding hers with gentle patience. She learned quickly, and soon her confident movements brought forth streams of warm milk, while Samuel slept nearby in a basket lined with soft quilting. On wash days, they worked side by side, Kenneth helping to hang the heavy wet clothes on lines strung between the pine trees. He held the clothespins while Ava shook out each piece, and sometimes their fingers brushed, sending quiet sparks through both their hearts. The sight of Samuel's tiny garments dancing beside Kenneth's worn shirts made Ava smile, seeing how their file wives had woven together like the threads of a sturdy cloth. When Sunday morning dawned clear and mild, Kenneth hitched their wagon with special care. Ava dressed Samuel in his cleanest gown, wrapping him snugly against the lingering chill. Kenneth had scrubbed his face pink and combed his unruly hair, wearing his best shirt despite its patched elbows. The wagon wheels creaked along the muddy road into town. Ava held Samuel close, her heart beating faster as the church came into view. She knew what waited: the stares, the whispers, the judgment of those who'd seen her shame that winter night at the trading post. Kenneth helped her down from the wagon, his touch respectful and steady. They paused at the church steps, and Ava saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. But when he spoke, his voice was firm. "The Lord welcomes all his children," he said, and opened the door. The congregation turned as one to stare. Ava felt the weight of their gazes, but Kenneth's presence beside her gave her strength. They found a pew near the back, and Samuel, as if sensing the importance of the moment, stayed peacefully quiet in her arms. The preacher stood at his pulpit, his eyes finding them often as he spoke about redemption and God's infinite capacity for healing broken hearts. His words seemed chosen carefully, and more than once, Ava saw him nod slightly in their direction. The message of hope and second chances wrapped around her like a warm shawl. After the service, while most folks filed past with uncertain glances, Widow Morrison approached them. Her weathered face creased with kindness as she held out a small package wrapped in faded calico. "These were my Thomas's first shoes," she said softly, unveiling tiny leather boots. "They ought to fit your boy when he's ready to walk." Her eyes met Ava's without judgment, only understanding. The simple gift seemed to break a dam. Other women drew closer, admiring Samuel's healthy cheeks and bright eyes. Men nodded to Kenneth with new respect, seeing how he stood protective yet humble beside his family. The scorn that had followed them since winter began to melt like snow in spring sunshine. Kenneth walked tall beside Ava as they left the church, carrying Samuel while she gathered their wagon blankets. His face shone with quiet pride, and Ava realized how much he'd grown from the stammering man who'd first brought her home. The awkwardness remained, but it was softened now by confidence in his role as provider and protector. That evening, after Samuel was settled in his cradle, Kenneth took down his Bible. The leather was smooth from years of handling, the pages marked with careful notes in his rough hand. He turned to Proverbs, and his voice rose strong and sure in the lamplight. "Who can find a virtuous woman?" he read, "for her price is far above rubies." His eyes met Ava's across the fire, and in that moment, something shifted in her heart. She saw him then not merely as her rescuer or the man who'd given her shelter. She saw Kenneth, truly saw him, as a husband chosen by Providence, a man whose quiet strength and genuine faith had built a foundation for love to grow. His dedication to her and Samuel, his patient teaching, his gentle ways, all of it spoke of a marriage deeper than any paper could declare. As Kenneth continued reading, his voice steady where it once would have trembled, Ava felt tears warm her cheeks. They were tears not of sorrow or shame, but of gratitude for this man who had become, in every way that mattered, her true husband in heart and spirit. Dawn painted the spring sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. Kenneth stood at the cabin door, breathing in the fresh morning air while watching Ava hang linens on the line. Samuel cooed from his basket nearby, tiny fists reaching for dancing shadows cast by new leaves. The peaceful scene before him filled Kenneth's heart with quiet joy. The distant thunder of hoofbeats shattered the morning calm. Kenneth's hand instinctively reached for the axe leaning against the cabin wall. Through the morning mist, he saw them approaching, 5 riders, their fine coats and polished boots marking them as men of wealth and influence. "Ava," Kenneth called softly, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. "Take Samuel inside." She gathered the baby quickly, clutching him close as she hurried past Kenneth. Her eyes met his briefly, full of worry and questions. The riders reined their horses to a stop in the yard. Their leader, a man Kenneth recognized as James Whitaker, the wealthy rancher from the valley, dismounted with practiced ease. His silver watch chain glinted in the morning sun, and his boots were unmarked by honest work. "Braddock," Whitaker said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy, "I trust you know why we're here." Kenneth's grip tightened on the axe handle, but he kept the blade lowered. "This is my home, Mr. Whitaker, my family." Whitaker reached into his coat and withdrew a sheaf of papers, the edges crisp and official. "I have here a legal contract, signed by the child's maternal grandmother, granting me full rights to the infant upon birth." His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to having his way. "The document includes provision for certain lands tied to the child's inheritance." Kenneth's hands trembled on the axe handle. Inside the cabin, he could hear Samuel's soft whimpers and Ava's gentle shushing. "That baby," Whitaker continued, "represents a significant investment. I paid good money to settle the grandmother's considerable debts, with the understanding that the child would be mine to raise." He took a step forward, boots crunching on the gravel. "I'm a reasonable man, Braddock. There could be compensation for your inconvenience." The suggestion that he would sell Samuel made Kenneth's stomach turn, but violence flickered at the edges of his thoughts, dark and tempting. His knuckles whitened around the axe handle dot. Then he remembered the scripture he'd read just that morning. "Blessed are the peacemakers." With tremendous effort, he lowered the axe completely, letting it rest against his leg. "The boy stays with his mother," Kenneth said, his voice rough but controlled. "Where he belongs." Whitaker's pleasant expression hardened. "I was afraid you'd be difficult about this." He gestured to his companions, who sat their horses with hands near their gun belts. "I'll return with the judge next week. The law is clear on this matter, Mountain Man. Best prepare yourself, and that woman, for the inevitable." The door creaked behind Kenneth, and Ava emerged, Samuel held tight against her chest. Her face was pale but determined as she faced the wealthy rancher. "You can't have him," she said, her voice breaking but strong. "He's my son." Whitaker replaced his hat, adjusting it carefully. "My dear, you'll find that what you want matters very little. The contract is binding." He swung back into his saddle with fluid grace. "1 week, Braddock. Have the child ready." The riders wheeled their horses and galloped away, leaving dust and dread in their wake. Kenneth watched until they disappeared around the bend, then turned to find Ava weeping silently, her tears falling on Samuel's downy head. That evening, after they'd secured the animals and closed up the cabin for the night, Kenneth sat heavily in his chair by the fire. The weight of the day's confrontation pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. "I'm afraid, Ava," he admitted softly, watching Samuel sleep in his cradle. "The law, it might not be on our side. Whitaker has money and influence. We have." He gestured helplessly at their humble surroundings. Ava moved to stand beside his chair, her hand coming to rest on his shoulder. "We have the Lord," she said firmly. "He didn't bring us this far to abandon us now. He'll make a way." Kenneth covered her hand with his own, drawing strength from her faith. Together, they knelt beside Samuel's cradle, their prayers rising urgent and fervent in the quiet cabin. "Lord," Kenneth whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "protect our boy. Show us your path." "Amen," Ava breathed, her fingers entwined with Kenneth's thought as they prepared for bed. The cabin's familiar walls seemed to press in closer, its safety suddenly fragile. Every creak of the settling logs made them start. Every whisper of wind carried thoughts of the coming confrontation. Samuel slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around his tiny life. Kenneth lay awake long into the night, listening to Ava's uneven breathing and knowing she too found no rest. Their home, once a sanctuary, now felt as vulnerable as a bird's nest in a growing storm. Morning sunlight filtered through the pines as Kenneth saddled his horse. His movements were slow, deliberate, masking the worry that churned inside him. Ava stood in the doorway, Samuel bundled against her chest, watching him prepare to leave. "The widow Morrison will stay with you," Kenneth said, adjusting the cinch. "She's bringing her quilt frame. Says it's time you learned proper quilting." He attempted a smile, though his eyes remained troubled. Ava nodded, stepping forward to straighten his collar. "Be careful on the road. There's talk of mudslides from the spring thaw." The widow appeared on the path, her gray hair neat under her bonnet, carrying her quilting supplies. Kenneth touched Ava's hand briefly, then mounted his horse. The touch of her fingers lingered as he rode away, following the rutted track toward town. The journey gave him time to think, his horse picking its way carefully around muddy patches. Scripture verses tumbled through his mind, mixing with memories of the wealthy rancher's threats. The marriage record might not stop Whitaker, but it would show the world what Kenneth already knew in his heart, that Ava and Samuel were his family before God. Town appeared through the trees, smoke rising from chimneys against the morning sky. Kenneth tied his horse outside the church, a simple wooden building with a modest cross above the door. Inside, lamplight glowed despite the hour. Preacher Davidson sat at his desk, surrounded by leather-bound books. The preacher looked up, his weathered face creasing in understanding. "Brother Kenneth, I've been expecting you." Kenneth removed his hat, twisting the brim in his hands. "Preacher, I need your counsel about Ava and the baby." "Sit." Davidson gestured to a wooden chair. "I've been studying these law books since word of Whitaker's claim reached me." He tapped a thick volume. "The situation is complex." Kenneth sank into the chair, his large frame making it creak. "The Lord brought her to me, preacher. I know that in my heart. But Whitaker has papers, lawyers." Davidson nodded slowly, closing the law book. "When you first brought Ava here, I have my doubts. Many of us did." He stood, moving to a shelf filled with church records. "But I've watched you these past months, seen how you care for her, for the child, how you've grown from a solitary man into a father and husband in all but name." Hope stirred in Kenneth's chest as the preacher pulled out a leather-bound register. "Can you help us?" "I can," Davidson said, returning to his desk. He opened the register to a fresh page, dipping his pen in ink. "The Lord's law supersedes man's law, Kenneth. And in his eyes, your commitment to Ava and Samuel is as binding as any legal document." Kenneth watched as the preacher's steady hand began recording details, names, dates, witnesses. "Will it be enough?" "Perhaps not in worldly terms," Davidson admitted, continuing to write. "But it establishes your union in the eyes of the church. And sometimes," he looked up with a slight smile, "that carries more weight than we expect." The morning passed as Davidson completed the record, adding his signature and seal with careful precision. He shared stories of his own early doubts about Kenneth and Ava, and how watching their devotion had changed his heart. "The Lord works in unexpected ways," the preacher said, signing the final witness line. Sometimes what seems improper to man's eyes is exactly what God intends. Kenneth accepted the marriage record with trembling hands, reading the formal words. That declared him and Ava husband and wife. "Thank you, preacher, for understanding." "Keep faith," Davidson said, walking him to the door. "And remember, patience can be as powerful as action. Let's see what the Lord has planned." The ride home seemed shorter, though the sun was setting by the time Kenneth approached his cabin. Through the gathering dusk, he saw Ava standing at the gate, Samuel in her arms. His heart swelled at the sight of them waiting for him. Dismounting, he wrapped them both in a fierce embrace. No words were needed. They stood together in the growing darkness, drawing strength from each other's presence. Inside the cabin, Kenneth lit the lamp while Ava settled Samuel for the night. The marriage record seemed to glow in the warm light. As he carefully unfolded it, "Ava," he called softly. She came to stand beside him, and his voice grew stronger as he read the formal words aloud. "Be it known that on this day, before God and these witnesses, Kenneth Braddock and Ava Mae Callahan are joined in holy matrimony." The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls as Kenneth's rough voice filled the quiet room with words of promise and belonging. Ava's hand found his as he read, their fingers intertwining just as their lives had gradually woven together, creating something new and precious in the sight of God. Snow crunched beneath stamping hooves as riders approached the cabin, one bitter. Morning. Kenneth stood at his chopping block, axe frozen mid-swing as he counted 6 men on horseback. The wealthy rancher Whitaker led them, his fine coat stark against the white landscape. Beside him rode a stern-faced man Kenneth didn't recognize, likely the county judge they'd been dreading. Ava appeared in the doorway, Samuel wrapped tight against her chest. Her face was pale but determined as she watched the men dismount. Neighbors began emerging from nearby homesteads, drawn by the commotion. The widow Morrison hurried over to stand beside Ava, her presence lending silent support. "That's them." "Your Honor," Whitaker declared, gesturing toward the cabin. "The mountain man who's keeping my property from me, and the girl whose mother signed legal contract." The judge, a tall man with iron-gray hair, pulled papers from his saddlebag. His boots left sharp prints in the fresh snow as he approached. The armed man Whitaker had brought spread out, hands resting near their weapons. Kenneth moved to stand before Ava, his heart pounding. The gathering crowd of neighbors pressed closer, their whispers carrying on the cold air. Most faces showed sympathy for Whitaker's claim. After all, a contract was a contract. "I have here," the judge announced, unfolding the papers, "a legally binding agreement signed by Sarah Mae Collins, mother of Anna Mae Collins, dated 3 months past." His voice carried across the yard. "It grants custody of the unborn child to Mr. James Whitaker in exchange for payment of substantial debts." Murmurs rose from the crowd. Kenneth felt the weight of their stares, judging him for standing against the law. His shoulders slumped as shame crept in. What right did he have, a rough mountain man, to claim this family as his own? But then Ava stepped forward, her boots crunching in the snow. Samuel stirred against her chest, making soft baby sounds that carried in the winter quiet. Her voice, though trembling, rang clear and strong. "Your Honor, I stand here of my own free will," she declared. "My mother had no right to sell my child. Kenneth Braddock is my rightful husband and Samuel's true father in the eyes of God and man." Kenneth's throat tightened at her words. He didn't feel worthy of such fierce loyalty, yet here she was, claiming him before everyone. The crowd shifted, some faces softening at her declaration. The judge frowned, studying the young woman before him. "A bold claim, Mrs. Braddock, is it? Do you have any proof of this marriage?" "They're lying," Whitaker cut in. "Everyone knows he bought her at the trading post. There was no proper marriage. If I may, Your Honor." A new voice joined the discussion. As Preacher Davidson pushed through the crowd, he had apparently traveled with the judge's party, though Kenneth hadn't noticed him arrive. The preacher pulled a leather folder from his coat. "I have here," Davidson continued, "the official marriage record of Kenneth Braddock and Ava Mae Collins, properly witnessed and registered in our church books." He handed the document to the judge with steady hands. Whitaker's face darkened as the judge carefully examined the record. "That's impossible. It must be falsified." "I signed it myself," Davidson stated firmly, "and I can testify to the genuine nature of their union. I've watched them build a true family these past months. Your Honor, whatever circumstances brought them together, God's hand has blessed their home." The judge studied the marriage record intently, comparing dates and signatures. The crowd held its breath, snow continuing to fall in the heavy silence. Kenneth reached for Ava's hand, finding strength in her touch as they waited. Whitaker shifted impatiently in his saddle. "A hastily arranged marriage shouldn't override a legal contract, Your Honor. The child was promised to me before birth." Mother cannot sell her grandchild," the judge stated slowly, looking up from the papers, "especially when that child's own mother objects. And while the circumstances are unusual, this appears to be a legitimate marriage record, properly witnessed and filed." Relief flooded through Kenneth as the judge continued. "The law must also consider what best serves the child's interests. I see before me an established home, two parents clearly devoted to their son's welfare." Whitaker's face twisted in fury. "I paid good money, which you may seek to recover from Sarah Mae Collins." The judge cut him off firmly. "But you have no claim to this child. This case is settled." He carefully folded the marriage record and handed it back to Preacher Davidson. The gathered neighbors began to drift away as Whitaker and his men angrily mounted their horses. Kenneth stood rooted in place, scarcely daring to believe it was over. Ava's hand tightened in his as they watched the riders disappear into the snowy woods. The judge's ruling hung in the crisp mountain air as Whitaker's threats echoed back. "This ain't over, mountain man." But his words carried away on the winter wind as he and his men spurred their horses through the snow, their fine coats disappearing into the tree line. Kenneth's shoulders sagged as tension drained from his body. He felt Ava's small hand squeeze his larger one, her whispered prayer barely audible. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for protecting our family." Little Samuel cooed against her chest, oblivious to how close they'd come to losing him. Kenneth reached out to touch the baby's downy head, his rough fingers gentle. The touch grounded him, made the victory real. Preacher Davidson stepped forward, his Bible held high. The remaining townsfolk gathered closer as his voice rang out across the yard. "Let us give thanks for God's wisdom shown through earthly justice today." He placed one hand on Kenneth's shoulder and the other on Ava's. "Lord, bless this household. Bless this man who chose mercy when he found a stranger in need. Bless this woman who found the courage to trust again. And bless this child, born into love rather than obligation." "Amen," came the collective response from the neighbors. The widow Morrison wiped tears from her eyes with her apron corner dot as afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow. Something remarkable happened. Instead of dispersing, the neighbors lingered. Martha Peterson hurried home only to return with a steaming apple pie. The Cooper family brought a jug of fresh cider. Soon the cabin's rough-hewn table groaned under the weight of impromptu offerings, cornbread, preserved peaches, and even Mrs. Morrison's famous honey cakes. The small cabin that had known mostly silence now rang with conversation and laughter. Women crowded around Ava, admiring Samuel and offering advice about teething. Men clapped Kenneth on the back, their earlier mockery transformed into genuine respect. "Never seen a man take to fatherhood so natural-like," old Jim Peterson declared, raising his cup of cider. "The way you handled that axe when trouble came. Steady, but peaceful. That's real strength there." Kenneth ducked his head, unused to praise. "Just wanted to protect what's mine," he mumbled. "And that's exactly what makes you a true husband and father," Preacher Davidson added warmly across the room. Ava sat in Kenneth's favorite chair by the fire, Samuel drowsing in her arms. She caught Kenneth's eye and smiled, a real smile then, reached her eyes and made his heart skip. The lamplight caught the simple gold band the preacher had given them when he recorded their marriage. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest, like their love. Young Tommy Cooper had brought his fiddle, and soon music filled the cabin. Feet tapped against the plank floor as neighbors joined in familiar hymns. Kenneth watched in wonder as his home transformed. The walls seemed to expand with warmth and welcome. Mrs. Morrison touched his arm. "You know, when you first brought her home, we all thought." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Well, we judged wrong. The Lord's ways ain't always what we expect. You've built something beautiful here." Kenneth nodded, emotion making it hard to speak. He looked around at the gathered faces, no longer strangers or scorners, but neighbors, friends, family. The preacher's words from months ago came back to him. Sometimes God's greatest blessings come disguised as challenges. The celebration continued as stars appeared in the winter sky. Ava moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and blessings, her face glowing. She had changed from the frightened girl at the trading post. Now she carried herself with quiet dignity, secure in her place as wife and mother. When she reached Kenneth's side, she leaned against him, Samuel sleeping peacefully between them. "I never thought I'd belong somewhere again," she whispered. "Never thought I'd have a real home." Kenneth wrapped his arm around her shoulders, marveling at how perfectly she fit there. "Reckon the Lord knew what he was about," he said softly. "That day at the trading post," his voice grew thick. "I was so alone before. Now look at all this." He gestured at their cabin, the neighbors sharing food and fellowship, children playing. In corners, women swapping recipes, men discussing spring planting. The love that had grown between him and Ava had somehow sparked something larger, drawing others into its warmth. Preacher Davidson raised his cup one final time. "To the Braddock family," he called out. "May their home always be blessed with the same grace they've shown to each other." "To the Braddocks." The response rang from every throat, and Kenneth felt tears prick his eyes. He was no longer the awkward mountain man, isolated and scorned. Here, holding his wife and child, surrounded by community, he had finally found his place in the world. Spring sunlight warmed the freshly tilled earth as Kenneth guided the plow behind their old Mari. Ava sat nearby on a weathered quilt, watching him work while little Samuel babbled in his wooden cradle. The cradle's runners rocked gently in the breeze, shaded by a patch of new maple leaves. "Reckon these beans'll take well," Kenneth called, out, pausing to wipe his brow. "Soil's good and dark." Ava nodded, her fingers busy with mending. "The corn, too, I hope. We could put up plenty for winter." They worked together through the warming days, Kenneth teaching Ava about planting times and soil, while she showed him clever ways to mend clothes and preserve food. Their cabin needed attention after the harsh winter, and they tackled the repairs side by side. Kenneth steadied the ladder while Ava handed up fresh shingles for the roof. Together they replaced warm boards on the porch, their hammers ringing. In harmony, one peaceful evening, as fireflies began to spark in the twilight, they sat together on that same mended porch. Samuel slept soundly inside, his soft breathing carried through the open window. "I used to hate myself something fierce," Ava said quietly, watching the dancing lights. "After everything, thought I was ruined forever." She turned to Kenneth, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But the Lord had other plans," He saved me for this, for our family. Kenneth's rough hand found hers in the growing dark. I was sure I'd die alone up here, he admitted, voice thick with emotion. Thought maybe that's all I deserved, being awkward as I am with folks. He swallowed hard. Never dreamed I'd have a wife, a son. The Lord's mercy is bigger than our mistakes, Ava whispered. She reached up to touch his weathered cheek. Kenneth turned to her, seeing not the desperate girl from the trading post, but his partner, his wife, the mother of his son. Their lips met softly in the firefly-lit dusk, not from duty or gratitude, but from love grown steady and true through shared trials and daily graces. Inside, Samuel sighed in his sleep, safe and cherished. Outside, the fireflies danced on, witnesses to love's quiet miracle. Late spring painted the Colorado mountains in wildflower colors. The little white church, usually quiet on Sunday mornings, buzzed with excitement as townsfolk squeezed into every pew. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floor. Kenneth stood tall at the front, his best shirt pressed smooth by Ava's careful hands. Gone was the nervous trembling that once marked his movements. He held Samuel proudly, the baby dressed in a christening gown Ava had sewn from her wedding fabric. The infant's dark eyes, so like his mother's, watched the congregation with quiet wonder. Ava stood beside them, her face glowing with joy. The preacher's words rang clear through the chapel as he blessed Samuel, speaking of God's providence and the miracle of family. Water droplets sparkled on the baby's forehead, and Kenneth's voice was strong and sure as he promised to raise his son in faith. Men who had once mocked the Virgin Mountain Man now lined up to shake Kenneth's hand, clapping him on the shoulder with genuine respect. Women who had whispered and stared now crowded around Ava, admiring Samuel and offering welcomes that rang true. Back at their cabin, the afternoon sun cast long golden rays across the freshly swept porch. Ava settled into her rocking chair, Samuel drowsy at her breast, while Kenneth worked nearby. His saw moved steady and sure through pine boards as he built a porch swing. A surprise he'd planned for weeks. Wagon wheels crunched on the path as neighbors arrived, bearing covered dishes and warm bread. The scent of fresh-baked pies mingled with spring flowers. Laughter echoed across the yard as children played and women set out food on tables made from planks and sawhorses. Kenneth paused in his work, watching Ava rock their son. The sight filled his chest with warmth he'd never known in his years of solitude. He crossed the porch quietly, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. "From a lonely mountain man to a father overnight," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "God surely works wonders." Ava reached up to cover his hand with hers, tears of joy brightening her eyes. "He surely does," she answered softly. The setting sun painted everything in honey gold light. The cabin they'd made into a home, the neighbors who'd become family, and the three of them together on the porch. Kenneth's arm circled Ava's shoulders as Samuel slept peacefully between them, their little family secure in love and surrounded by faith-quiet victory. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.